start off by asking, Zelensky arrives in Spain today after sealing the Rafale framework with France. How does this back-to-back tour reflect on Ukraine's need for European backing at this stage of the war?
Well, we have to look at it from a bit broader perspective. Zelensky's back-to-back visits to France and to Spain are not simply a European tour. They reflect the very urgent need to rebuild momentum with these two countries. While supported, have often been more cautious than the frontline states. Paris and Madrid are sophisticated actors. They look at Ukraine not only through the lens of battlefield necessity, but through broader strategic questions. Their role in the NATO, their interest in Africa, migration pressure, and the system challenges that Russia now possesses well beyond Eastern Europe. So Zelensky now is in the effect of winning them back, reminding them that Ukraine fight is directly linked to their own strategic vulnerabilities. For France, the connection is clear. Russia expanding footprint in Sahel has pushed French forces and influences out of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And that vacuum now is being filled by Russian military contractors, disinformation cells, and resources extraction deals. Paris understands that Russia victory in Ukraine will amplify Moscow reach in Africa, further eroding French influence and weakening European southern flank. That's why the Rafale framework matters for Paris, not only as industry policy, but as strategic counterweight in the war where Russia is encroaching on France's traditional zone of influence. For Spain, on the other hand, the urgency is different, but equally pressing. Madrid is facing hybrid pressures from Russia, including manipulation of irregular migration routes via North Africa and to Las Islas Canarias. Spanish intelligence services have openly warned that some of the recent surges in irregular crossings show signs of coordinated destabilization effort. To that, Russia growing digital and disinformation operation in Spain, including targeting elections and far-right mobilization. For Spain, then, the war is not an abstraction. It's a part of a wider hybrid threat environment.
But what does this say? I mean, I understand that this obviously directly affects EU member states, including Spain and France and even Germany. But what does this actually mean for the Ukrainians? I mean, you can see that Zelensky is basically jetting around Europe trying to get weapons. Does this mean that the state of the Ukraine war is quite devastating on the Ukrainians, that they can't sustain it without other help, outside help?
Well, in my opinion, absolutely yes, because what we can see now that the substantial package is important because Madrid and France, we have a situation in Ukraine is quite devastating, and bearing in mind a very difficult situation when it comes to the recent corruption scandal, the people in Ukraine also need a very important message that Europe is standing behind them, and European countries as well will going to give them a hand in order to show that the money and the real support, like weapons, like anti-drone systems, air defense assets, which are linked back to us, for instance, a part of broader strategy, will make Ukraine strong enough that Russia has to divert resources and attention and capacity to reducing the pressure that can apply in a different way. So Zelensky is trying at the first time, well, give the answer and to certain the people can ask in Ukraine what is really going on, and diverting interest from corruption scandals and from irregularity scandals and some critics as well towards his effort to win back Europe, and as well showing the world that helping Europe is now the part of its own strategy and not distraction from it. So it is actually something that the Ukraine should interpret as Ukraine urgency behind the Rafale deal as a not only Eastern Front power, but it's something which will be able to be a multi-theater disruptor, including backing juntas that push European partners in Africa or weaponizing migration routes and disinformation. He wished to, in my opinion, to show that this is a strategic reinvestment in European influence, not only the assistance to Ukraine.
Okay, if we can also get Mr. Williams' take here as well. Now, Zelensky, as we just said, is touring a few European countries, concluding in Spain. Do you think that this push for air power commitments is something that's critical for the Ukrainians, and how important is it when it comes to this diplomatic push when it comes to the battlefield survival of Ukraine. They've taken heavy losses in the recent few days.
Well, of course, these trips to Europe, to the United States, that Zelensky regularly undertakes is crucial for the continuation of the war. He depends on the support of others. In terms of the battlefield and what's going on now, well, Zelensky is trying to gain support for next year, assuming that the war will continue into next year. The EU calculates that the war will continue into 2026, end of 2026. And so Zelensky is trying to shore up support beyond the immediate circumstances. But the immediate circumstances are critical and I'm afraid desperate for Ukraine. The Russians are advancing ruthlessly, relentlessly, progressively, and the Ukrainians don't have an answer in terms of their manpower and the equipment that they've got at the moment to withstand the Russian onslaught. So if the Ukrainians manage to sustain themselves and defend themselves beyond this year and into next year, yes, the support of the Europeans will be essential to continuing the war. But I'm afraid it may be too late.
But do you think there's also a sense of urgency, as Dr. Kamler there said, that the European partners within the EU also feel the strain? It's not just a Ukrainian-Russian battle. It's an existential threat, I suppose, for the rest of Europe.
Yes, they regard the support to Ukraine as urgent, but if it was a real existential threat to the whole of Europe, not to the Ukraine, then the Europeans would already agreed to send as much money as they can to Ukraine. And the fact that they're arguing about guarantees to Belgium and so on means that there are limits that the Europeans have to defending Ukraine and therefore themselves. They talk rhetorically in terms of defending Ukraine, but there are severe limits, and the Europeans are reaching the limit of what they are willing to support Ukraine on in terms of finance.
Okay, Dr. Kamler, now Spain promised to roll out an unspecified substantial aid package for Ukraine as Zelensky is visiting Madrid. What is the significance of this? And do you agree there with Mr. Williams that there's sort of a negotiation process and there really isn't a sense of urgency when it comes to Europe?
Well, we have to see two very important things because first of all, the substantial package signals Spain's recognition that European security now lives on two fronts at once, east and south, and helping Ukraine is in effect forward defense on Mediterranean, Black Sea basin, and European maritime neighborhood. And it's really important, bearing in mind that Spain and Madrid is a home of the Union for Mediterranean. So Spain therefore sees you ensuring Ukraine does not collapse is a part of its total security strategy, and that's important. Moreover, we have to take into account that Spain is crucial when connecting Ukraine to transatlantic supply like Turkey and Black Sea basin, where grain routes, naval balance, and critical sea corridors determine the wider stability in the region. But when it comes to Europe, in how Europe interprets Ukraine urgency behind the Rafale agreement, we have to look at this even more in a more broader perspective, because Europe reads Ukraine urgency as reflection of two realities: declining US engagement and steep escalation of Russian pressures, both at the front and in the wider region. On the battlefield, Russia is breathing forward in several sectors around Kupiansk, Novovadvika, and in part of Zaporozhye line, taking advantage of Ukrainian manpower shortage and delays in Western ammunition deliveries. Ukraine urgently needs to rebuild control over the skies if it's to stabilize the front in 2026 and 2027. But Europe also interprets this urgency globally, because now we can see and we can observe, even though it's slightly taking our issues away, but Moscow is expanding its influence very aggressively in Africa, pushing France out of the Sahel, entrenching itself in Libya, inserting mercenary and intelligence network along Europe's southern periphery. In Black Basin, Russia continues to test Ukrainian ports, undersea cables and maritime routes directly threatening European food security and stability in the entire regions, as well as our very much strategic partner like Turkey. And this, when it comes to Korea, this is where its roles becomes critical. Control on straits and under Montreux Convention, cooperation with NATO navies, the Ankara balancing diplomacy, all made Turkey a central actor in securing a stable Black Sea environment. And Europe knows that. They know that with a strong Ukraine, Turkey will be a buffer, the only one buffer between Russia and NATO in maritime flank. That's the reason why the Rafale framework is not simply about the fighter jet. It's about Europe acknowledging that Ukraine must be built into long-term air and maritime power. And we have to tell them, because otherwise, when we stabilize the Black Sea region and act as counterweight to Russian adversaries in Africa and Mediterranean, we have to support our strategic partner like Turkey, like Egypt, in order to ensure that the stability region will remain.